Hello. We have a viewer. It's Arvid. Hey, man. This streaming thing is very weird. I don't know how you do it. Just feel like I'm talking to an empty room or to a brick wall. So the comp's coming together nicely. Pending any of the render changes we make, I think it's pretty close. I will show you the before and after. They're also my Nuke. It's a bit lagging, is it? Wonder if I... it won't let me change any of the stream settings. Oh, ILM compa. Sure thing. If my Nuke ever unfreezes, put down a node that's notoriously crashy and freezy, so I might just turn that bad boy off. Is the stream watchable or is it too laggy? Pretty good? Awesome. Hopefully there's not too much delay. Alright. So yeah, here's the comp. Basically what I've done is brought in your render and just split it up into chunks with the AOVs. So we got diffuse here, spec, pretty classic, all the AOVs. If I had light groups, what I would probably do is I'd have the different light groups here, and then baked inside of those would be all of the AOVs that I could then break out again into mini comps, and it would kind of quadruple in size. But just because we have the one key light, the one HDR, we can get away with a smaller comp. So yeah, I'm just plussing the diffuse and the indirect together. Doing stuff. I'll show you the before and after, and then I'll break down a little bit more what I've done. There's nothing too fancy in here, but there's one or two mildly interesting CG tricks. So also this giant EXR is definitely taxing my computer, but we'll work through it. So once we cache in this frame, this is what I've done. Hey, Master Elrac, welcome to the stream. So cool, here we go. Here's the before and after from the raw CG to the current comp. And then here I've got the original photo down here. This is the one that we up-resed through the Smart AI, and I've also got the original just to compare. The Smart AI does a pretty good job at creating detail, which is amazing. But it also has some problems, like you see, it's got these kind of wild, crazy noise patterns. So I wanted to make sure I have the original image as well, just so I can kind of compare notes and see what's going on. If something might be an artifact of photography or an artifact of the up-resing. Like, for example, this color, I think, is only present in the up-res, so I'm going to say, oh, that's probably not something I should try and replicate. But yeah, so if we compare my current comp to the render, it's pretty close, and a lot of that is thanks to Arvid and the whole team of guys who've made these assets and made this render. It's a very nice render to work with, and as a comper, when you get nice renders, it's always a good day. So much credit goes to you guys for that. Wow, it's definitely taking its time to load in. Sorry, team. I'm gonna unplug some of the more interesting nodes. What was used for the up-res? I believe it was, if I just check my Gigapixel, David Egan on Arvid's Discord up-resed it using Gigapixel, AI Gigapixel. So yeah, cool. We've cached in our frame. And here is the CG render, and here is the photo. So really, a lot of the first work I did was just trying to match the colors and tonality. If you compare the original render, where do I work professionally? So I'm a sort of a contract compositor, which is sort of the nature of the beast. I spend a lot of my time at Animal Logic, which is a studio in Sydney. You might have known them from making the Lego Movie. They've made all the Lego movies and Happy Feet, and more recently Peter Rabbit. So they were a creative studio for that, and they also have done a lot of work with Marvel as a vendor. So they sort of dabble in being a creative studio and as a visual effects vendor. And I've also worked for Method Studios in Sydney, and Fin Design and Effects. They're some of my main companies that I sort of tend to float between, all in Sydney. Yeah, so that's a bit about me. Been working in the feature film industry for, I believe this is my 7th year. I might be wrong. You sort of lose track of these things. I'll give you guys, I'll show you my my website. That will show a little bit about myself. This is me, Ben Wotton. These are some of the films I've worked on. Yeah, feel free to ask any questions. But yeah, back to the fun. So yeah, sort of first sort of steps I did with trying to take this raw render and match it to the photo was to try and match the tonality. I'm just going to unplug this as well. Got a bunch of stuff slowing us down. Yeah, so one of the first things I like doing is making sure my black and my white point match to what I'm trying to match in comp. So you see our raw render's got a black point that is black, pretty much. You mostly see this in CG because that's sort of just the nature of the beast. When something disappears into shadow, it becomes a value of 0 or black. But you find in photography, it's not always the case. You know, often in film they will fog up a set, which will make almost no black point, depending on how foggy it is. It'll always be of some value. And when you're matching photography like we are in this case, photographers obviously process their image and grade them. And so you can see here that the photographers put this kind of blue wash into the shadows. So what I did first thing was I matched the blacks with this grade. Again, I apologize for my potato computer struggling with this. But yeah, so what you can do, a really great tool in Nuke, is you can sample black points from other images using the eyedropper. So basically what I did was I looked at my reference and then I expose up and went, well, what's probably the darkest part of this image? And I think I settled for somewhere in here. And you can just draw a big box and sample that black point. Do I have a pet? I don't have a pet personally, living in an apartment in Sydney, but we do have a family dog, a very adorable cavoodle who I love to visit whenever I get the chance. Yeah, so went through, match the black point of the image. Also, you have to take into account things like there's a lot of JPEG compression. You can see here all the blocks, and that's going to throw off the black point. When you're working on feature film, you're mostly working on kind of a raw image, so you won't face this problem, but it's something that's really important to be aware of. So I sampled this color, but then I took it with a grain of salt. Because you can see a lot of this blocking. So I then went in and kind of finessed it visually by changing kind of the color balance to get kind of a close approximation. Picture, please. Oh, okay. Let's see. I'll see if I can find a picture. Here we go. This goes out to Arvid's wife, Paddy Cavoodle, on Instagram. Might bring just this tab over. There he is. He's a very naughty boy, but he's a very good boy. Hopefully that satisfies. My pleasure. Yeah, so I also then matched the white point because our raw render, I was just comparing stuff like the wall, which I know isn't completely white. I was trying to look around this image and go, oh, what's something that's white? There's definitely this reflection. You can expose that down and compare that to the to our reference, but there's just, you know, there's a bunch of JPEG compression and clipping, and it's not really a good reference to kind of match. So I more did this one by eye, where I just looked at the wall and the color temperature of the whole image compared to the original, and I thought, oh, it's a bit orange and a tiny, maybe a tiny bit magenta. It's hard to tell sometimes. So, but basically what I did was I opened the color wheel. I might do it again. Let's do it off the side here. So if we pretend, I'm just going to copy our black value across. We'll pretend we've already matched that. Oh, that didn't work. Come on. Get in there. Alright, so there's our black value. And then I'll open up our multiplier and I'll sort of look and I'll go, seems a bit purple, so a bit magenta. So I'll take some of that out, maybe just a small value. And then, oh, it's a bit green now. And you just start finessing the colors. Actually, you know what? There is quite a bit of purple in that raw image. So make sure you don't go too far. And also, I think there's a value change. So if we take our value here, we can start increasing the brightness, get it more in line. We're still a bit magenta, so just suck out some color. So that's sort of the process you do. You just nudge the colors in certain directions, and then you end up, hopefully, exactly matching. So I think I got it pretty close, tonality-wise. And then basically start getting down to the nitty-gritty and looking at the raw image and going, okay, what is in this image that is not in our CG render? There's a few obvious things, like some colors can get nudging around. One of the big things I noticed, and feel free to ask any questions as well if you want me to chat about something in particular, but I noticed this medallion here hanging on the wall. It's kind of missing some texture, so I thought, oh, maybe I can try and match that in comp. So what I did, also I want to say, just to cover myself, I'm working on a still image here. If I was to be working on something that's moving, like a film, you would definitely want to do what I'm about to show you in a way that can be applied to motion. One of the philosophies I always have when I'm working is to try and have everything as procedural as possible. So I'll put as few kind of 2D roto shapes as possible. You can see here I've used a lot of P mats for things. A P mat is a mat that uses the position pass from lighting to basically give you a mat, an alpha that you can use. And the amazing thing of that is you can have position passes that are based off camera movement, position passes based off objects, even position passes called a P-ref, which is based off the actual surface point and how it moves through space. And so that way, if you're working on something for hours and then they go, oh, we've changed the camera, we've changed the animation, that all flows through, and your PMAT, because it's using actual lighting data, will just update its position. Whereas if you'd had a roto shape to do this, and you'd drawn, oh, I want my mat to be here, and suddenly your CG is over here, you have to go through and you might have 70 roto shapes that you have to update. So as a rule, I always try and keep everything procedural, almost like software. It just runs itself, you know? Like, it might take a little bit longer to set up. Like, it's really easy to just plop down a roto shape and then bam, there's your shape. But it will actually save you a lot of work in the long run when changes happen, because they always happen. So with a grain of salt, these things I've done not that way, because I know for certain that I'm working on a 2D image that is not going to change that much. But generally you can do this kind of techniques, with trackers and projections and procedural things that use data from your CG. But yeah, first thing I did was I noticed this little chord wasn't lining up to the pin, so I just used a transform mask to nudge that up. I would have used probably a PMAT to do that, or depending on how much a camera is moving, if a camera is moving, maybe some projection techniques to stick that on there, or use geometry as reference. But in this case, just a 2D transform works. And then I set about trying to match. It'll fix that. Nice. Or feel free not to. It's already here, but yeah. Amulet will get new textures. Sweet. Awesome. But yeah, so in the interim, I thought, how can I kind of create these dents? And so I'll show you what I've done. I did this to the amulet by basically taking a glass distort, which is, this is a Nuke group, Nuke's really cool because you can create little tools that have their own interface, and it's made up of a bunch of other Nuke nodes inside. So a glass distort is just something you can easily get off Nukepedia or create one yourself. But basically it uses Nuke's iDistort node to push pixels around. And so instead of creating one myself, I've already got one here, so that's what I'm using. But if you Google glass distort Nuke, you should be able to find one somewhere on Nukepedia. But yeah, so what I did was I basically used paint shapes. The first one is quite big and broad to kind of upset the surface of the amulet to be not as perfect in CG, because you can see a lot of kind of dents and wobbles in this one. And then the second one is a more detailed paint layer that I used to create this scratches and things in the surface. I think it holds up fairly well. Obviously the lighting's slightly different because it's going to be impossible to actually match because there was no visual effects supervisor there while the photographer was doing his work to capture light probes and all that kind of stuff. But yeah, I tried to get it matching as close as possible. Hey David, welcome. So yeah, that's how I kind of, a little trick, like compers always need to have a tool bag of hacks they can do. Like obviously in a perfect world, you know, you get lighting that comes out that's perfect, but this world is not perfect, and this lighting is just about as good as you can hope to get. It's as I said earlier, it's really lovely, and I'm really enjoying working on it. But yeah, as a comper, you just got to be able to have a tool bag of hacks that are really gross and dirty, but will get you there quicker than kicking stuff back to assets. Because if in a film pipeline, this would have to go back several departments, which could take a few weeks to go all the way back to the assets department to change textures or whatever. In this case, it could just be a case of some missing textures, but yeah, as a comper, sometimes it's quicker for you to just get your hands dirty and do something quick and gross like this, rather than sending it back through several departments and making a big fuss about things. Ah, yes. So, David, you did the amulet. Nice. Yeah, I think it might have just been missed. So I think Arvid mentioned he's going to give another version, which will render all this obsolete, which is awesome as well for me, because the less hacks and band-aids I put in my comp, the easier it is. But it's also, yeah, it's a fun exercise to show how in comp you can often get a problem and have to fix it. But yeah, I'm sure we'll get a new render with that displacement map. And then I think, what did I do here? Oh yeah, on top of it, here's an interesting exercise in maths. If you watch any of Arvid's videos, you'll notice he uses multiply a bunch in Maya to blend textures and things like that. It's the same in Nuke. I'm not a mathematician. I really dislike maths, but this is fairly simple, so don't tune out. Multiply is exactly how it sounds. If you take a value of 1, which is what this constant is, and multiply it by your original image, it will not affect the original image. But what I've done is I have gone into this. I'll just gamma the view in case you can't see it. And I've just painted some dark spots, and then I've multiplied it on top, and then it just adds some dirt into those little scratches as well. And the reason I've done it this way instead of just painting directly on the middle, this is called the B stream in compositing. You can see the B of the merge node runs all the way up. You always want to preserve your B stream. It's like the spine of your comp. And painting on the B stream is extremely, extremely naughty, especially in feature film. It's just heavy because it has to run lots of different processes through a paint node. But B, if you're having a film that's going to be sent off to a stereo department to be converted into stereo, your paint node, you might have stereo information coming down and your paint node is only 2-dimensional, and they basically won't be able to replicate it. So it's always important to do things with paint nodes and stuff off to the side. And then again, if this was a moving image, I would probably be projecting it onto a position pass or using a camera to stick it on there. Back to what I was saying about procedural stuff. Yeah, but again, because this is a still image, this whole section's pretty naughty. It's all, if anything moves, this all falls apart, but I know nothing's going to move. Yeah. Hey Ignacio, welcome to the stream. We're missing amulet textures, yeah. So all of this will be updated with nice juicy textures. Has anyone got any questions from what I've been chatting about, or shall I just keep soldiering on? Cool. So I might talk about how to change colors in an image and how to do it in a more intelligent way. You know, it's really easy to put down a grade node and put down a roto shape and say, oh, I want this section to be more red or whatever. And then, you know, you split this out and go red. And then bam, your thing becomes more red. You can get away with that to an extent. I try to avoid doing that as much as possible. I find if you comp in a more photographic and physical way, your results will kind of look better effortlessly. Like you can always get somewhere in comp just by working hard at something. But I like working more smart at things to sort of save the hard work. One of my supervisors has a phrase, he calls it lazy comping, and he says lazy compers are the best because they find the most efficient way to do things to save themselves from having to do hard work. And I sort of try to live by that motto. Same with what I was saying with doing, you know, PMATs and making everything procedural. It's lazy comping. It might take you a tiny bit longer at the start, but it's going to just save you so much work later when you get, you know, it's 10 p.m. at night and you get another change and you don't have to update 50 different nodes. You just update one thing and it kind of flows through. So in saying that, if we look at our raw render and if we look at our reference image, you can see things like this this wood here and this metal and some of the brass. They're just slightly different colors. And this is something that in comp is really, really quick and easy to iterate on, whereas it can take 10 times the time in lighting. And yeah, like I said, this lighting is super close, and it just requires a tiny nudge in comp to make it match our reference, which is what the goal of this comp is, to try and make our CG render look as much like the original photo as possible. So subjectively, some could say this wood looks better dark, but we're matching this photo, so that's the task. There's a really handy utility pass you can get out of CG, which Arvid has provided me with. Some companies call it the surface color pass. Arvid's named it diffuse raw here. And basically it's a pass that is just the albedo textures of the diffuse contribution. And so if we want to change the texture of our wood, these are the textures, minus any lighting, minus any shadows, just the raw textures. And what you can do is, back to our simple maths, a different operation this time, we can divide. So if we divide our surface color, or our diffuse raw, by our diffuse pass, what we have done is we've extracted the lighting. So now everything's got a white shader, basically, and we can see our lighting. So we've got our shadows, you can see the color of the lighting, you can even sample that and see the values. Pretty close to white, but you can see it's a little warmer. Yeah, David, it's so handy. it's such an easy trick as well, to basically tear apart your textures and lighting in comp without having to go back into CG. And if it's a small tweak like this, instead of sending it back to the assets department and then waiting for it to sit on the farm, yeah, you can just tweak this super fast in comp with this pass. It's interesting to see how all metals don't show the lighting. Yes, so what we're doing now is we're looking at the diffuse contribution. Metallic shaders have 0 diffuse. If it's a pure metal, there's no diffuse. It's 100% a specular contribution. So you'll see all of our reflections and metals over here in the specular. So we're just pulling apart the diffuse part at the moment down to its very raw elements. So yeah, basically now that I've torn apart the textures and the lighting, I've now got 2 B streams. Remember I was talking about B streams? So there's one here and there's one here, because we've ripped these 2 apart by dividing them. So what we can do now is we can use our crypto mats. If you don't know what crypto mats are, it's a super handy utility pass that comes out of 3D, which gives an ID to every single object. You can make one per object. You can make them per material, and you see here we've got asset, material, and per object, and they all have different things. So if I just want to isolate just the trumpets material, I'll use a crypto material, or if I just want to isolate one little part, I can use the crypto asset, and basically use the crypto mat to pick what object you want. So if you view our alpha, I've picked our clock here, and what you do is I've just plugged that mask into a grade node, and I've just tweaked the texture of the clock without having to tweak the texture in Photoshop or in Maya and then re-render it through the lighting. So I love this trick. I use it all the time when I'm working with CG. And the way I did that was I viewed further downstream. I viewed when I'd done our blacks and white matching as well, just so I could like really finesse the color and get it close. It's not going to be perfect. Again, the lighting's mildly different to what the original photo is, but I think the spirit of the color of the wood is now the same. And if you compare the before and after, you can see the difference in the wood. And you see I've done it on a bunch of things. I've done it on the metal here, which is a bit dark, and you can see in the raw photo it's quite bright. And I did that down here in the specular somewhere, because it's metal, so it's a specular contribution. There you go. Yeah, so here's just basically a bunch of grades. What's this one doing? That's the wood of our little box here, tweaking that. I did a few interesting things on this little pot. I know people used to split it up into multi-passes of RGB. Sounds like CryptoMat is better since it's made it. Yeah, totally. CryptoMat's super handy for that kind of thing. Other studios will also just render you a list of giant mats. If you go in here, you'll have 50 passes, just M underscore for mat, and just heaps of mats, which is also fine. CryptoMat is becoming more widespread in the industry because it is just so handy to render 3 different passes, and then the artist can pick whatever objects they want. So I'm seeing it more and more now. But yeah, with the pot, I think I did a bit of, no, I changed my, oh yeah, I did a black point grade. I just wanted to add a tiny bit of extra contrast. You gotta be really careful when you do gammas and black points. They're sort of not a linear photographic operation because they add contrast, but you can sprinkle them in just to, if I turn that black point on and off, you can see it just crushes the blacks of the texture a little bit. And when you multiply that back with the lighting, you can see it just contrasts it up a bit, which is, when I was looking at the raw image, I was like, yeah, that's a pretty contrasty texture. There's sort of more distance between the highs and lows, so I just contrasted the texture a bit. How would CryptoMat work with transparent glass materials? Yes, that's one of its downfalls. So this is where you would render out a matte as an AOV from your image. So you can see here the crypto matte pass, there is no refraction from the glass at all. So for example, this metal which I was tweaking down here in my specular, I wasn't able to tweak it through the glass. If I turn all of these grades on and off, you can see the metal on the left changes, but not through the glass. So it has got its limitations, but there's also ways around it just by making custom mattes, because you can refract mattes just like you can refract AOVs, just like this is our diffuse. See, notice we don't actually have a refraction AOV or a transmission AOV, as Arnold calls it. That's because Arvid set it up so that all of the AOVs get transmitted through the glass, which is, I prefer this way of working personally. Some may disagree, but I just really like having, if I want to tweak my diffuse, I can tweak my refracted diffuse at the same time. I don't have to go to some other part and do all kinds of mad science to try and extract the diffuse contribution out of the transmissive AOV. It's just, yeah, I prefer this way 1,000 times. Yeah. So what else did I do? Here, just on the diffuse, this is one of the cases where I actually did want to change the lighting as well. I could have done this grade. I'll show you what I've done. I've just added a little bit of a power window, a bit of a spotlight hitting this clock, because you can see here in the raw image, something's hitting it. I'm not quite sure where it's coming from, but there's this specular rim and there's this kind of just pool of light. So I wanted to recreate that. I could have done this up here and going with my rule of everything being photographic. Potentially could have been more correct. But because I was not applying any color operations, see here it's just a value of 2 in the gain and a gamma, which again, slightly naughty, but I just wanted to lower the contrast slightly. So very careful with the gamma, only added 0.1. Yeah, so that's why I did that there. If I was doing something with color, I'd probably do it here in the lighting or the texture. But it's mainly if you just want to affect textures is the real benefit of tearing this apart. So I added that little power window, and you can see I've also added it here to give a punch onto the spec of the clock, which I believe is, let me just find where I did that. There it is, mask. Oh yeah, so you can see that both of these grades are using the same mask. I just piped it down here. That's our PMAT. Again, PMAT, super handy. If the camera moves, your matte moves. Saves you a lot of time. So yeah, you can see here on the clock it's catching quite a harsh highlight. And if you wanted to try and kind of match this in lighting, you'd probably create more problems than it solved with everything else, which is so close to the reference. So this is something that's good in comp to just be able to do really quickly. Just add this warm light, and always checking as well when you're doing kind of any values like this with light, try and expose down and then look at the image. If you're always just working at this level, especially as you see I'm working in aces, which can capture and display a huge range of colors, you've got to always be changing your exposure to be checking that your highlights are the same. Now obviously here, in our up-res version of the image, there's some crazy stuff going on. So I'll reference the original work. There's still a bunch of hyper-saturated JPEG stuff, which I'll discount. It's really important to know how images kind of work when they compress, and then you can kind of say, well, these giant orange values are probably not really indicative of what's actually happening. It's more of a JPEG trying to compress bright light into a 0 to 1 space. But what you can do is you can kind of look at the surrounding areas and see how they're behaving, and try and kind of match that way. And then you can kind of assume that your highlights are doing the same thing and doing the correct thing. So yeah, I did that. What else? Haven't touched the coat, because the coat's very minimal contribution here, just on our horn. It's nothing that really needed to happen there. We've also got a volume render, which is for our cloudy glass, cloudy water. I think I just lifted the bottom of that one up a little bit, again using a PMAT. Also, you can see here PMATs are great, but they can also give you jaggy problems when they're trying to differentiate between objects. So what I've done here is I also pulled a crypto mat, which has the same anti-aliasing and everything applied as the render. So it should match pixel for pixel. So I've just multiplied my PMAT by my crypto mat. And also that gets rid of any unwanted other parts as well. But the PMAT's helpful because I can add this ramp in. Whereas if I just did a crypto mat, I just get the whole object. So, and again, with the simple maths, a multiply. So you're taking different values from 0 to 1. This one is completely 1. And then if you multiply it by anything that's less than 1, it will basically hold itself out. Do PMATs use world position? Yeah, so you can render out lots of different types of PMATs. So there's a P world, which is exactly that, uses the world position. So if you've got a moving camera, you can place a PMAT on the ground and the camera can move around it and your mat will stay exactly stuck to that surface. There's also P object, which is the position by an object's transforms. That's very important. If you've got a deforming character like an animal, it will only use the transform of an object. So it can be helpful for solid objects, but that's when you get pref, which is a new-ish pass. Pref literally sticks to the surface of an object, a deforming object or not. So when we're working on movie like Peter Rabbit, where you have animals with jackets and fur, pref is amazing because all of that's just deforming all over the place, and you can put mats that stick to the surface. And then there's also position by camera, which you can use. You mostly use the depth of position by camera, which is it's pretty much the same as the depth pass. So that's the PC, position camera, blue channel, and just so X is red channel, Y is green channel, Z is blue channel. And so you can use PC blue to do depth of field calculations. And you can also bring it out and use it as a visual thing to do stuff like distance haze and fog and that kind of thing. So yeah, there's a bunch of different position channels. And if you view it up here, it's just called P here. And that's our position. And basically every pixel here, you can see down here, you can see the pixel value. Each one of those corresponds to either a world position or a camera position or object position. So yeah, super handy. So yeah, on my transmission, I just pulled this mat. If I would go back to my RGBA, and oh no, this mat, and I use that just to lift up the bottom of our foggy water because it just seemed a bit more luminous here, so I just wanted to nudge that like so. Amazing. Yeah, it is amazing. I love PMATs. I use so many of them. Yeah, and again, they take longer to set up than a roto shape, but they'll save your butt down the road. Finally, oh yeah, so under the table, what I might do as well is I'll comp something in here. In our raw render, we've just got quite a lot of light hitting under the table, but in the photo, it's quite in shadow. And I was looking at this, and it took a while to figure out what it is, but I think these are like the metal struts that hold the table up to the wall or something, maybe. It's very ambiguous what's actually under there. But I might try and Google some reference image of under a table and try and like smush it in there. But for now, I just graded that dark using a PMAT and a crypto mat. Again, because the PMAT gives you really yucky, bad aliased, jaggy edges. So I just dilated that out using a road node and then multiplied it by the crypto mat to get the nice anti-aliasing. Then I did a kind of pre-black point black point grade. So I've matched my blacks, which I was talking about before. Here, I just wanted to add a little bit of crunch into the shadows. I'm still not necessarily finished with this grade, but you can see what it's doing is it just is crushing some of the very blacks of the image a tiny bit, so that when I lift the blacks to match it, they just sort of disappear into a bit of inkiness, which you often get, like, camera sensors aren't perfect. When things fall off into darkness, the sensor and camera software is quite good at kind of compressing only the data you need to see. And so black stuff often gets a bit compressed, so that's what I'm trying to simulate here. Also with, JPEG compression as well. JPEG will blow away lots of dark details, and because we're trying to match a JPEG photo, that's what I'm trying to match. So also simulate that. Now this is completely obsolete, but I included it because it's a really important lesson when you're working with CG. I'm not sure. I'll do a quick explanation of what pre-mold is, just in case you guys aren't aware. When you get an image with an alpha, when you pre-multiply the image, what it does is it takes your image and it uses your alpha like a cookie cutter to stamp out your image. So if I got rendered, say, here, I'll show you how it works. Let's do a little exercise. We'll take our mat of our clock wood, and we are going to copy its alpha into our CG. And so now this image is unpre-multiplied. There's no pre-multiplication happening to it. And what I'll do is I'll pre-mult it, and it's cookie-cutted the image by the alpha channel, which is this. Now, often in CG, you'll get a character or something which is pre-multiplied already. It's on black, like this, and you need to comp. Say it's a rabbit from Peter Rabbit, which I just worked on. You'll get the rabbit with an alpha on black, and you need to merge it over your background. It's really important when you're working on CG to unpre-multiply any CG you're working on. So now if I take this and I unpre-multiply it, you see it kind of takes any alpha values that are not 1. You can see again down here in our color sampler, this is the alpha. See, we've got an alpha of 1, and then as I move to the edge, it starts tapering off with a nice anti-aliased edge. And when you expose up, you can see that. And these are values of not 1. When you unpre-multiply it, it takes whatever this color is, and it restores it with basically what it would look like if it had an alpha of 1. See that? So now it's just the pure color. There's no alpha aliasing or fade off or anything like that. And so the reason this is really important is when you start doing grades on your CG, if you're doing it pre-multed and you can do things that will give it like bright or dark edges which look bad. You'll also get that if your image is incorrectly double pre-multed or double unpre-multed or anything like that. So it's you've got to be careful. But also things, if I wanted to lift my image, do an offset, it will lift everything. And then if I pre-multed it again, to fix that, cookie cut it again, what I've done, see it's been double pre-multed, is I am actually going to be eating in some of my edges and eroding in the CG, which is a huge no-no. So it's really important when you have a pre-multiplied image and you want to do any kind of work on it, is that you unpre-multiply it, then you do your work, then you pre-multiply it. And so you can see here we've got a pre-multiplied image that we've unpre-multiplied, graded, then pre-multiplied, so the math adds up. So we have not destroyed our edges in any way. So I said it's obsolete here because we actually don't have any alpha, but I included this anyway because it's a really important lesson. And you see here I've unpre-multiplied every channel, unpre-mult all. So up here you can choose which channel you want to unpre-mult. I unpre-multed all. Oops, change that back to all. So that when I shuffle out my diffuse contribution, it's unpre-multiplied and everything's unpre-multiplied. And I'm doing all my work unpre-multiplied, really important. And then right here at the bottom, when I've finished my grades, my match blacks, I'm going to copy, I always do this to be safe. It is possible to preserve your alpha channel through all of this, but it's messy. So what I've done here is I've made sure that I'm retrieving my original alpha. You can see this pipe here. It travels all the way up to the left, right back to our raw CG. So I'm getting the alpha that's correct and pre-multiplying by that alpha. And then you can proceed to do other work on top of it. So if you're adding things like light blooming and glows and depth of field, you want to do that on an image that's been pre-multiplied because you need your edges to be correct and consistent for all of that stuff. Does that all make sense? Any questions? I know that's a lot of information. Cool, we're getting positive emojis. I like that. Yeah, so I think that's kind of the bulk of what I did. And the finishing touches is basically taking our perfect CG, which is, always makes every asset creator, every surfacer, every lighter, it makes them cry because they take their beautiful, pristine, amazing CGI, they put it into comp, and comp just like blows the crap out of it and destroys all the detail. So we often, as compers, cop a lot of flack. They're like, oh, my beautiful render, you made it so soft. But it's also the nature of the beast, because CGI is perfect and real life is not, and photos are not. We need to do what's called taking away the CG curse. In the real world, nothing is perfectly sharp, nothing is perfectly crisp. So compers need to find ways of fixing that. Now, you may be tempted just to go, oh, I need to soften my image. I'm just going to blur it by like 1.5 pixels. And sure, I don't know how much it shows up on the stream as well. We're getting down into the pretty nitty gritty stuff, so feel free to chime in if you can't really see any differences. I'll try and zoom in. Yeah, we've blurred it. Sure, it's soft. It's not exactly sexy though. Don't ever do this. Don't ever do this. Some compers will go, oh, I will use the soften node because the soften node will soften but preserve detail, and yeah, it's better than blur. If I see a soften node in someone's comp, I'll be like, okay, that's fair. It gives better results, but there's better ways. At least in my opinion. I don't know. I'm obsessed with light and trying to capture light and trying to match photographic natures of things. So I've built this node, which is something I made. It's called Real Lens. Basically what I did, I have this, I'll show you how I made it and how you can make a simple version as well. I have this vintage Russian lens on my camera called a Helios 44-2, and I love it. And it just is old and crap, but in the most beautiful way. As any photographer will know, old crap lenses are beautiful. Just watch Blade Runner, for example. And they are very expensive lenses, but the crapness they add is gorgeous. And I wanted to somehow capture that and apply it to CG. And this started when I was working on some holograms. The holograms were just so crisp and they didn't look like light. And the director kept saying, I need them to look like light. And I had just bought this lens and I was like, this lens just makes light look wacky. I want to replicate that. So what I did was I took an OLED display, which, as you know, if a pixel is black, the pixel doesn't even turn on, so it stays black. And I put a dot matrix on it, and then I shot bracketed exposures of that dot matrix. Now, again, I don't know how much the stream will compress this, but here's our dot matrix, and you can zoom in. And this is basically what my lens saw the dots as. Now, when you expose up, that gets really exciting. You can see all the bloom in the aberration that the lens is creating. And it gets even more spicy as you get towards the edge of frame. And it just gets wild. I love it. It's just, and you can see it like changes direction around the frame. And you can do this yourself. Just find a pitch black room at night, set up your camera, put dots on a screen, and take bracketed exposures of it, and then merge them into an HDR. Because you can see here, these values in the middle are 32, 21, 15. And you have captured how your lens sees light, basically. And so this Real Lens tool basically takes several of these turns them into what's called a kernel, which is just a little square. You chop around it, and you can use this. I'm about to show you how. And I use several of them to do different operations around the edge of the frame to try and replicate this swirling light effect. But I'll show you here how to do it with just one of them. So you crop in. Make sure, pro tip for making kernels, you want an odd number as your resolution so that there's a center pixel. In this case, I didn't want to use much of the color because I'm going to want to do that separately. So I desaturated my kernel. And what you do is use a convolve node, and I might just plug it into our render here just to save my processing power. And a convolve node is like a blur, except it's a blur that uses a reference image to do the blurring. And in this case, our reference image is our photographic kernel, like so. And so it will take every pixel and try to turn every pixel into this. And because it's got a really high exposure, that helps because it does like a fall off. If every pixel was the same value, you would completely blur the image, but it creates a kind of gradient based off the power of the pixel. So because the middle here is like a value of 23, only pixels in your reference image that have a value of 23 and higher are going to really blur out and blow out into this really gorgeous bloom. And everything else is just going to inherit a slight softening effect. So that's why it's important to be high dynamic range. Now I've done this really in an exaggerated manner, but you can see how it softens our image. But if I find a highlight, it softens it really nicely. Now this image is a bit gross, so I might just cop the heavy comp. But if I go to some of these specs, and also if I turn the saturation back to full, you see that they blur out. Let's make it a bit smaller as well. Hopefully the stream captures it. It's going to be subtle. But see, now we're getting this, you can see some of that red fringing. Would you select the dot from the dot matrix based on what angle the light is coming from? So the reason for the angles across the screen space is because of the lens distortion and the way the lens distorts the light. So it doesn't matter which direction the light source is coming from, it just matters where it is in screen space. So yeah, if your pixel's on the left, it's going to get blurred out pointing to the left based off the way that Helios lens refracts the light so violently. So that's sort of how it works. But yeah, so now you see we've softened our image, but it's using a photographic element, which I'm obsessed with. Like, if you want to make something look photographic, use stuff that's from photos. And our highlights, see we've got this blue fringe here. Hopefully the stream's showing it. It's quite obvious on my raw Nuke. But yeah. Yeah. I'll show you an example. If I make a noise like a star field, alright, here's our star field. Let's grade it to be really bright, and then gamma it way down. So we got really bright values. Now if we just blur this, say put in a value of 2, see that it just blurs. Now if I take my real lens that I made, and then we do that, see it's softening, but it's softening into, if I expose up, those little kernels. And then as we get closer to the edge of the frame, you can see they start smearing. If I change the size, hopefully it shows up. But you can see you start getting this swirling effect as it changes directions. Oh yeah, and then this is a classic bug. Just change the frame and change back. Hopefully it fixes it. Nuke is really bad at handling that. Yeah, so that's a photographic way of softening your image, which gives really pleasing results. And if you're working on an image with really high dynamic range as well, the highlights just become kind of magical when they get blurred through this photographic element. It just looks lovely. Yeah, so that's a really great way to match softness. Well, match softness is probably the wrong word. It's probably a little hard to identically match softness and aberration using that. But if you want an artistic softening, it's really good. Yeah, just take away the CG curse. So yeah, I also put an exponential blur. I don't want to use the word glow because that word comes with lots of really naughty connotations, which I'll explain. But yeah, so I use this exponential blur to just simulate a bit of light bloom, because you can see in our original reference image, all the highlights is a little bit bloomy, a little bit magical and dreamy. Quite possibly it's been shot on a vintage lens as well. You'll see there's a lot more in vintage lenses, much more glow. Really expensive lenses, modern lenses, have been designed to basically remove all of these aberrations, but cinema is known for having them as a thing of beauty. So yeah, do that. And the reason you don't use a glow, if I see anyone in Nuke use the glow node, that's trouble right there. The glow node is not photographic, it's not mathematically correct, it's not even good looking. I don't know why it exists. It does a one glow operation with one size, which is not how light works at all, and it looks terrible. And as you see, it makes our image brighter. If you want something to glow, you want to be dispersing the existing light. You don't ever want to be adding light, especially in comp. If you start doing glows and stuff and changing values, you can get in a lot of trouble. So an exponential glow, as you see, really you can only see a lot of change on the highlights. Because what it is, if you crack it open, it's a blur with a value of whatever you set it at, and then a blur that's double that, and a blur that's double that, and a blur that's double that, and you get it, and then blur, 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 all the way out. So it's exponential, and so it creates a really gentle, soft fall off that matches light. All of these are plus together, which obviously when you plus 10 different images together, you're going to get them brightened up to that factor. So then once it's plus together, you do the math, multiply it back down by however much you've plugged into it. It creates an average basically. So you're averaging out the light source, and so you're not creating luminance, you're dispersing it. So when we expose down and I change A and B, you can see the luminance is dispersed rather than created, which is very important. Last bit, this is a huge no-no, but I've said this a few times in this stream, because we're matching a photo, you can tell in this photo there is a lot of sharpening going on, not only in our up-res AI version, but you can see in the raw image, sharpening city. Don't ever sharpen anything like this. Like, sharpen is such a naughty operation. It's super destructive. If you would never use this in film, only in the rarest cases, sometimes if you needed to use it for an effect, but you would never use a sharpen to sharpen. Like, the pixels you've got are the pixels you work with. But we're matching a photo, so I added some sharpening. I did it after the blur, because sometimes sharpen can create really wild values that the blur will pick up on and make crazy. And as you see, I think I'm allergic to sharpen. I've only done the tiniest amount, just to say I did, because it's in the reference image. If I sharpened our image this hard, especially when our image is much higher resolution, it would look shockingly bad. So I just put in just enough to give it that photographic quality, and then I put our real lens on top of that to take away some of the sharpening effect, because it's bad, but it's in our reference image. And this is something that can easily be turned off as well to taste. Like when we talk to Arvid in the community, say, do we want the sharpening? Do we not? We can decide. But for now, I'm just matching the picture. And the final step, grain. Super important to bed all your colors together. What's that? When comping for film, do you more often try to match more to the camera that shot it, or do you try and match to the real world? Good question. you definitely try and match to the footage, to the plate and the camera that shot it, because you're going to have real world footage. In this case, we're working on a pure CGI image, so the world is my oyster that I can do what I want with, even though I'm matching a reference photo. When you're compositing elements into live action, yeah, you need to zoom into the pixel, and you need to say, yeah, that pixel now doesn't look like a CG pixel. It looks like a pixel that was shot by this camera. So yeah, you do that. But in regards to, the reason I sort of said is because in regards to the real world, you want to do things in a way that it makes sense physically. So, I've been talking about simple maths like the multiply divide, separating our light colors from our textures, doing exponential blurs, using photographic elements. So in some like you want to have a workflow that is physically based, just like physically based rendering. Like it's not as scientific, but physically based comping, you want to have everything work in a way that is how light actually works. You can get there by hacking it and just eyeballing it, but I find you'll get there a lot quicker by using techniques that are mathematical and yeah, more close to how real life works. It just sort of does the work for you a lot of the time if you do it right. I hope that answers the question. Yeah, and then last step, grain. This is using a scanned Alexa plate, I believe, or it's something, I forget. But yeah, this is created to match the grain of an Alexa camera. There's also a grain node in Nuke, which is not terrible. The Alexa grain is based off it a lot, but I think it uses a color lookup to place grain in different parts of the image. Yeah, when matching grain, if you're matching to the plate, you view your different channels. So if I go RG or B in Nuke, it will switch between red, green, and blue channel. And you start, you go to your red channel, you expose up or something, and then you start dialing in your grain size and intensity, and you constantly be comparing to your reference picture or to your plate, because you want your blacks to, like if you got pitch black next to, like CG pitch black next to your plate pitch black, it's going to stick out like a sore thumb without grain. So you want to make sure your grain is identical, so they just melt together. Grain is that final step that just melts your comp and just ties everything together. So it's really important to spend a lot of time going through watching your grain, red, green, blue channel, making sure your grain matches exactly, using the color lookups to make sure, because the grain isn't going to be uniform, like it might be stronger in the shadows, weaker in the highlights. Very important. In this case, I just kind of went, because obviously there's nothing to match in this JPEG'd up reference photo. I just looked at the photo and thought about it, and I went, this looks very filmy. Film has a lot of grain. I could be wrong about the reference photo, but I decided, yeah, let's put a bit, like quite heavy grain on. It also just helps take away the CG curse on top of everything we've done. And now if we just compare the before and after, you can see what I'm talking about with this CG curse. Here's our raw render and our cork, and here's the comp. I don't know how much the stream will pick up on the subtleties, but you can just see our highlights get the edge taken off them. All our really sharp edges just melt a little bit, they bloom a little bit, colors bleed together a little bit. There's another good area. This horn's good. See here, we've got this perfect black seam, and then see this highlight just bleeds some of its saturation over the blacks. I'm not sure if that's showing up, but you can take my word for it. But yeah, this orange highlight bleeding over, just like it would in a photograph. It's really subtle stuff. Like you've really got to have a light hand in this. Just enough that it's felt and not actually seen. That's a big rule. Like you want to feel that something's there, and not to be looking at it going, oh, he's added a glow. I can see a glow. You just want to feel and kind of believe, yeah, it's real. Oh, it does show? Oh, awesome. Yeah, so that's kind of the goal when you're comping, is you want your work to be felt and not seen. You want to be invisible. You can see some of the texture work I tweaked on this, kind of popping that pattern up a bit more, dropping the specular down. And this is when I was saying, you know, light as an asset artist gets so sad. Like here, you can actually see the wood grain that's showing up from the displacement map. It's gone in the final image. I'm sorry. I am sorry. But also I'm not, because it's got to look like a photo. And in a photo, it's not that sharp. Yeah, the trumpet, because it's quite a bright area here, you can see a lot more of that light bleeding and how it just ties it in to the background a lot more. Makes it feel more like it's there. This end here, really perfect and clean and crisp and sharp, and now it just those highlights are bleeding over. And it's capturing some light coming off this wall that's blooming out the camera. These highlights have melted a little bit. It's just enough to kind of just soften everything together and just knit it. Yeah, so that's kind of it in the journey of comping this picture. I'll probably work on it for a little bit of time. Wait for updated renders with new displacement maps and textures and stuff for this amulet, things like that. But I think generally the comp's pretty close. Probably send you Arvid through an EXR for you to look at and give any notes before we share it with the world. But yeah, pretty happy with how it is so far. Hopefully you guys are too. Everyone's done a really amazing job on all these assets, so I hope I can do them justice in comp and not destroy them too much. But yeah, has anyone got any last questions before I leave you guys to it? Thank you. No worries. Thank you guys. Thanks for tuning in. This whole streaming thing is pretty new to me, so hopefully I've not been too awkward and been able to show you some of what I do, some of what is going into this picture. Cool. And any guys as well that are on the Discord, if you have any other questions or thoughts that come up later, feel free to shoot me a message. I'm always happy to chat. Yeah. Like I feel like I've benefited so much from Arvid's tutorials in this community because yeah, I'm a comper by trade and a lighter by hobby, basically. So yeah, I really value how much I've been able to learn. So anything I can give back to do with comping and Nuke would be my pleasure. Yeah, it's a really great community to be part of. And hopefully you've been able to understand me through my Australian accent. I know certain people tend to struggle with it. And apologies if I've used any slang or colloquialisms that didn't make sense. It really is another language sometimes. All right, I will log off. Look forward to chatting to you guys on the Discord. Thanks for tuning in. It's been a pleasure. See you guys around. Thanks again.